All right, boys, we're back. Perfect movie quest for Alan's selection for a perfect movie. His nomination for a perfect movie this week is The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. What year is this movie made, Al? 2003? Excellent movie, in my opinion, but this isn't about me. This is about Alan. Alan was the one that nominated this movie as a perfect movie. And so, Alan, we're just going to start with you. And I want you to tell us anything you want about this movie, including your case as to why you believe it's a perfect movie. And, or, watching it this time, if anything came up that you might think might detract from its perfection, but just lay it all out before us. And then after you're done, we'll each take a turn and kind of give our individual thoughts, not only on the movie, but on your thoughts in your case as to why it's perfect. And we'll go from there. So take it away, Al.
All right. I am excited about this because this is one that whenever a good movie comes out, since 2003, sorry, I know I held up 2002, but yeah, since 2003, since the first time that I saw this movie, anytime a new movie has come out, I'm like, that was an awesome movie. It's going to be in my top 10. This movie still ranks above most of those movies. And there are a lot of reasons, and I'll get into a couple of those, and then we can kind of discuss a little bit. But I remember thinking the first time that I watched this movie, I was like, oh, this is kind of like Dances with Wolves, except, a little bit better because it's more interesting. That was like my first reaction from this movie when I first saw it. And then it's also been compared to Avatar, the non-native enters the native lands and then does a bunch of things. The difference that I realized with this, and I remember I made this comment probably to Becky, I don't remember, or whoever I watched this movie with the first time. I made the comment. I was like, it's a really good movie, except is it problematic that the Last Samurai is just a white guy from America? Like, is that not problematic to anybody else? And the reason I had that thought was because of movies like Avatar and Dances with Wolves, where it takes this savior complex where an American ends up becoming the savior of the poor tribal folks that can't take care of themselves and fight against the bad white man, right? But what I realized is that this is not the case. The character that Tom Cruise portrays in this movie is not the savior of the samurai, and samurai is actually plural. So it's not about like a singular last individual. It is about the last of a dying breed in feudal Japan, as Japan tries to make this transition into the modern world. And so taking that into context, I realized that the character development in this is so beautiful. And it's not just centered on Nathan Algren's character. He's the catalyst, and he's the storytelling device that allows us as Westerners, like arguably in this group, as Westerners, to immerse ourselves into that culture, and then asks the right questions and be confused a little bit along the way to be the narrative storytelling device to tell the story of the Last Samurai, collectively speaking. And he doesn't save him, right? He's not the savior. The story would still happen without Nathan Algren in it. But he adds that narrative device for us. And then the character development of him is so beautiful in the sense that he creates this friendship with Ken Watanabe, his character, Kasimoto, throughout the story. And their little conversations that they have, it's just like so poetic. And I made several notes about things that I liked about this movie. As I was kind of going down my list of reviewing this from the lens of a perfect movie. Really quick, I'll just hit the high points. Was I entertained? This is a very entertaining movie. The action sequences are phenomenal. The detail, and this leads into the was I impressed? The detail, the attention to detail for the cultural aspects of Japan, regardless of the fact that the story itself is borrowing very liberally from historical events. I'll give that the pass in this case. But what they paid really good attention to were the cultural aspects, both of feudal Japan, and then in the early modern era during the Industrial Revolution. Like, they blended that very well, and they made those distinctions very well, and it executed it expertly, in my opinion. The question of whether or not I was moved in this movie is so powerful. The connections that are built between the characters, between Quasimodo and the Emperor, between Nathan Algren and even Billy Connolly, I forget his actual character's name. Like, even that introductory just kind of like brotherhood that was there was well executed. Like, you felt connected to all of these characters. The relationship between, oh, I forgot her name all of a sudden. The main female lead who takes in Nathan Algren, the internal turmoil of her having to host the man that killed her husband, right? That's still like all of Taka. Thank you. All of that character development has huge dividends throughout the story. And then the overall story itself, this kind of love letter to the end of a traditional era, and the sadness kind of in reconciliation that it's coming to an end. And the way that the Emperor kind of concludes this movie, some of the last lines that he gives, being able to embrace, the future, but while also remembering our past and our traditions and where we come from, I think is a message that is timeless for the ages. Now, one of the things that I liked about this movie, the correlation that, or maybe how about this, the disdain that Nathan Algren had for Custard, but then the admiration that he had for Leonidas. And what I thought that this is really telling about his character development and the trauma that he experienced in his own past. And because they're effectively very similar stories and very similar outcomes. But the way that he chose to kind of hone in on that towards the end of the movie, I thought was very indicative of the trauma that was built up in his character, and then kind of the resolution and acceptance of his fate with his friends. And then one of the things that I also really appreciated about this movie, and this is just a minor attention to detail piece, when he's telling the story of Leonidas, and he says, against 1 million Persians, 1 million. Do you know this number? And he says, I know this number, right? Just this acknowledgement that there is still a language barrier in this movie. At the climax of the movie, just the short little note. It's like, you know what? We're not going to skip the fact that all of a sudden everybody understands each other, and that we've already worked past that, and we established this earlier on in the film. No, it's language barriers exist, and English to Japanese, I kind of wish Drew were here to kind of talk about this a little bit. English and Japanese are not are not very compatible languages. One of the things that I would say might be a downfall of this movie, but I can't verify it because I don't speak Japanese, but I have noticed it in movies, for example, when they speak French and then they put in subtitles, and I'm like, that's not what they said. Like, it's slightly off. Like, they get the gist, but not what was actually said. And I get the feeling that probably happened in this movie when they would put the subtitles down in Japanese, but I don't really know, but I get the feeling. And so, maybe just Drew could chime in and give us that at another time. However, I figured that would probably be a knock against this movie, and it's not necessarily in the movie itself, but in the translation process. Okay, the climax of this movie is the freaking best. The final charge, the desperation of the soldiers, of the samurai, the basic hopelessness of what it is that they're going into, but it coupled with that one moment with Quasimodo and Nathan Algren, where it's like, we will make the Emperor hear you. And as kind of the reconciliation that the movie and the era is all coming to a close. There's one piece that I love to this day. It's part of my regular workout routine, and I love running to the soundtrack. Hans Zimmer was on fire in this movie. And I'm going to try and share just one piece of this. And it happens at the climax of this movie, the final charge, right? They had their small victory, and then they're going to rush in, and and they're like, you know what, we're going to take the offensive. We're going to rush them. And before they bring out the Gatling guns, while they're kind of shooting the cannons, and then the Japanese military is there on the line with the freaking colonel that you really hope he dies, and then he does. But part of the soundtrack that still moves me to this day, like it gives me goosebumps just listening to it. And we're not super technically advanced yet. I'd probably be able to superimpose this if I was smarter. Instead, I'm just playing it on my phone, which hopefully is kind of loud enough that you guys can hear it. The build up, the swell, not hearing it. All right, edit that part out. Farts. Okay, anyway, let me just resync up. Okay, there's a moment in the score, and you just have to listen to it. It actually wasn't part of the original album. It was a bonus track that was added on in like the exclusive. It's an exclusive bonus track. But it's Hans Zimmer, and the piece is called "The Final Charge," and it's this really awesome build. It says, dun 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 dun, and it's just like it's this awesome build up as they start charging in on their horses, and they're taking the fray, and the cannons are blowing through. Oh, and by the way, I have a hard time saying this guy's name. Hiroyuki Sanada. He's been in a lot of movies, a lot of American movies, but he's a really awesome Japanese martial artist. He's the guy that didn't like Nathan Algren, and he gets shot during the battle, and then he gets on his horse and he's like spitting out blood. He's like, nope, I'm still going. But that's when he finally when he finally dies. So they're all running in, they're all charging, they're all getting shot and blown up, and people are falling left and right. You see, like Nathan Algren gets shot, Quasimodo gets shot, like they're all just falling. But the music builds it up so much that you just hope, you are hoping beyond hope that they make it through. You want them to go and win, and then they don't. And one of the most beautiful moments of this movie to me was as Nathan Algren helps Quasimodo finish it. And Quasimodo looks up and he says, "They're all perfect." In a reference to something from earlier in the film where he says, "You could spend your entire life looking for the perfect cherry blossom and it would not be a life wasted." And then at the end, he realizes that every cherry blossom is perfect in and of itself, as a realization and like a culmination of his ethos, acceptance of life, and understanding that it's not just about the end of the samurai, but it is about the Japanese people and their culture, and that ruling in, or that blending of the old and the new is going to make it perfect, that every life is perfect. And I thought that was the most beautiful ending to his character, and it was perfectly executed. So there are so many powerful moments and emotions in this movie. I have one probably major critique. Oh, I'll get to that in a sec, actually. I'm going to see if you guys bring it up. But there was one other aspect that I thought was just very genuinely impressive. And it was, I don't remember if you guys know, if you remember, there was a YouTube series a while back where they would take an expert in a field of whatever, and then they would watch those kinds of scenes and then have the expert review them. They did one for Japanese swordplay, and they took a kendo master and they made him watch American or rather Hollywood fight scenes in Japanese style fighting with katanas, swordplay, etc. And then he evaluated them. He didn't even speak English, but he evaluated this movie, and he said that the scene where Tom Cruise goes up against the 4 or 5 would-be assassins, and it happens fast. Like the entire sequence happens in less than a minute. It's like 30 seconds of action. And it happens so fast that they do a replay because they want you to see it again, right? And he reviewed that, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that was perfect. 10 out of 10. Tom Cruise nailed it." And this is just another testament to Tom Cruise just being a true master of his trade, where he gives his all in every movie that he does. And my biggest critique of this particular movie is that we didn't get to see Tom Cruise run for at least a solid quarter to a half a mile at full speed. But, if that's my biggest critique, I think I'm okay. There was one thing that on this recent viewing that I kind of made me go, I'm not so sure about that. but I'll see if you guys bring it up, and I will go ahead and stop talking.
All right, there's your case. Justin, you want to go first? Let us know your relationship with this movie, any insights from your previous watching of the movie, and what your thoughts are in relation to what Alan just said.
Oh, just let me get comfortable here. Number one, completely historically inaccurate in all sense. They didn't even wear that armor in the 1870s. Okay. They borrowed from a different era and were using different things to fight. And oh, by the way, did samurai use two swords? No, they didn't, especially in 1870s. And so what's all that Hollywood about? Oh my gosh, the problems of this movie are exactly the problems in The Last Knight. Just wanted to bring that up. Oh wait, Last Knight is a perfect movie. So it's very interesting that it just kind of parallels The Last Samurai. So First Night, did I say Last Night? Dark Knight. Anyway, I can overlook that and give it some grace. I say that this movie definitely hits you in the feels. It is not your typical, like you say, fish out of water, culture out of water. And it does it better than the other ones you said, like Dances with Wolves and Avatar and a few other ones, in that he does help, right? He helps with the Emperor and is kind of like, he shows the samurai, like somebody from the outside showing the same respect to the Emperor as the samurai would, bowing himself and saying, "I'd gladly take my life." That kind of helped the Emperor come to his final conclusion to keep it independent. So yeah, he was a bystander more than he was the hero. Overall, well executed, good storyline, good dialogue, great dialogue. Hans Zimmer, I never heard of him. So I wonder what else he does music wise. I loved him showing him how to play basketball or baseball in the field. And he's like, no, you got to run in there. All just trying to chase him. So he did have a running scene. So I also wanted to point out a few things that you didn't talk about. Number one, $500 a month is equivalent to $15,000 a month today. So like way above his pay grade for the time. So he's like, oh man, that's stupid kind of money. I can't refuse it. So they were really bribing him to go over there. So I thought that was interesting. And then I'm not very familiar with this term, but it's called Bushido. And it's doing the right thing, even if it's hard. And there's a lot of Japanese people that say that although it's historically inaccurate, that it presents what Bushido is perfectly. So there you have it. I do have a few more tidbits, but I'll stop there.
So I too loved the movie. I watched it with Alora and Cardin, as they've been venturing into more adult themed movies. And yeah, this one was really good. Unfortunately, I couldn't just like sit down and watch it. They interrupted with questions and having to explain little things here and there, which didn't detract too much. But yeah, I'd echo a lot of the things that Alan said. Yeah, it was I think one of the things I really liked too is that it showed the dichotomy of like that type of life where he spent months very peaceful, calm, reflective. I mean, he did training, he was doing physical stuff, etc. But then you have the polar opposite of war and, you know, fighting to the death and etc. And yeah, it does bring out a lot. I think my biggest takeaway is that it makes me want to journal more, because just watching him go through and record what was happening and you know, him practicing and kind of just cataloging what was happening. Again, kind of paralleling that Dances with Wolves, but again, it's 10-ish years newer, younger, but so there's style differences between the 90s and the 2000s. But I feel like I appreciated the dance, the Last Samurai journaling more than Dances with Wolves. Yeah, as Alan said, it wasn't that white savior complex because the movie would have happened regardless of whether he was there or not. I do wonder. I think there's just like little minutia, right? They would have probably been less prepared for the howitzers and the Gatling guns, the automatic firearms at the end. And then kind of Algren bringing in the 300, kind of get them into a bottleneck where it's easier to kill them and everything. But yeah, I mean, music was fantastic. This was Hans Zimmer's 100th score, which is crazy. And Justin, to answer your question, yeah, Hans Zimmer, he's the guy who helped write keyboards for that music video or that song. Video Killed the Radio Star. That's where he got his start, was in a band, and then moved into film, which I think was a much better move for him. I think there's a lot of great movies with him at the musical helm. But yeah, overall, I loved it. It was great watching it with my kids, with the older two, getting to kind of re-experience that. There were a handful of things that I had forgotten since the last time I watched it, which was probably 7-8 years ago, from start to finish. And so it was nice to kind of have that all come up. But yeah, overall, excellent, grade A.
Yeah, so I thought the exact same thing Alan did when I saw The Last Samurai for the first time. In the theater, I remember thinking, oh, this is like Dances with Wolves, but even better because I think Japan's way cooler than American Indians, and that's just my personal preference. And so I was super stoked. But then the further the movie went on, the further I started seeing distinctions between the two. And by the end of the movie, I remember coming to the same conclusion that it was pretty unique, that it's not that it doesn't fall into some of the same tropes as Dances with Wolves, Avatar, Pocahontas, those types of fish out of water stories. But because it's Japanese based, like being a martial artist myself, I loved the idea of, an American finding himself with his back against the wall, obligated to learn how to sword fight. What a cool premise. Like, that's just interesting. And I was a teenager when this movie came out, so it's like interesting as a teenager. But the more that I watch this movie, the more I appreciate a lot of the subtleties of the movie that I didn't notice maybe the first couple times of watching it. So some of the subtleties being like, Alan mentioned the character development of Nathan Algren, our protagonist. I remember I had a conversation with a roommate of mine when I was 18 years old. My roommate was Adam Brooks, and he said that he started watching The Last Samurai. And I was like, oh, that's one of my favorite movies. What'd you think? He's like, dude, I couldn't even get through the first 20 minutes. Like, Tom Cruise is just acting like an idiot. And it was like bothering me so much I had to turn it off. And I'm like, you turned it off? And he's like, yeah, I just can't stand Tom Cruise acting like a bumbling idiot. And I'm like, he doesn't keep acting like that. Like, this is called character progression. It's called character development. He's supposed to bother you at the beginning of the movie. He's supposed to be an idiotic drunk that like is stumbling around and his life is in shambles and nobody likes him and he stinks. Like, that's his character. What, you're turning it off because the movie's doing what it's supposed to? I remember being so off put, and I think about that now every single time I watch the movie, as I like lean into his stupidity at the beginning. I love it. I love that everybody's annoyed by him. I love that he's like this, he's got this weird skill set, and so they still need to use him even though nobody likes him. And I love that he is just lazy. He doesn't come out on stage on time. He has to be pulled out, and then he's fired on the spot. And then he's drunkenly asking for more money from the Japanese diplomats. And they think that he's just greedy and gross and rude. Like, he's just a disgusting, abhorrent, horrible person. And then he's journaling on his way over to Japan. And so you're getting into his head and you're like, oh, this guy has trauma. So you start to build a little empathy for him. Like, it's all part of the, like, his perfect character development like to the T. It's interesting, it's character developing, you're progressing with him, you're following him, you understand him, you're empathizing with him, and you're rooting for him. I love like those first scenes in Japan when it's just obvious that he just doesn't care. You know, he's like, tell this man that if he does not shoot me, I will kill him or whatever, you know. And he's like, Ute, Ute. And he's like, shoot me, you son of a bitch. Like, he just wants to die, but he can't seem to kill himself. And so he's drowning in the bottle. He's standing in front of guns, asking people to shoot him. He's being like staying at the front lines of the war when they have that battle in the woods, when everybody's telling him to fall back with the rest of the leadership. He's like, no, I'm going to stay up front. And he stays up there. Like, he's looking to die. But what's cool about the character is that he wants to die, but he can't let himself die. So even when he's surrounded by samurai and he's waving the flag and the pole, he's desperate to live, and he doesn't even know why. Like, if that's not a layered, deep, empathetic, relatable character, I don't know what is. And so again, like, they take him up to the village. He's on his knees, and you can see him looking up at that Japanese warrior that does the katana right to his neck. And he doesn't flinch. He's like, please kill me. That's what his face is saying. He's like, I want to die. This sucks. Kill me. Like, I will be happier dead. And that's his character. And so to transform from that into what we get at the end of the movie, where he's side by side with Katsumoto in Japanese like war armor, dressed as a samurai, side by side with these people that he's grown to love, it's just like the most beautiful character progression that could be displayed in any movie at any time, anywhere. I love this movie. I love that character. One thing that especially stuck out to me this last time watching it was just his relationship with the little boy. I love that connection. And I love, again, just the cultural differences between what we know as Americans, again, illustrated through the lens of Nathan Algren, and the stark contrast of the completely different culture of Japan that's illustrated in the village and everything around him. Like, one of my favorite lines of the movie is when he's and I don't have it memorized, but it's when he's like walking through the village and he says, from the moment they wake up, they dedicate themselves to whatever they pursue. Never before have I seen such discipline. And that, in a nutshell, just encapsulates the Japanese culture in such a way that you as an audience member, all of a sudden, where you might have been fearful or trepidatious, or like you're rooting for the, you know, Americans, well, now you like see the beauty of this culture that is Japan. And as he's saying that, you see that guy like with the web of his thumb and his finger, like with the teacup or whatever. Like, it's just every motion that they make is intentional, and it's like beautiful and artistic and perfect. And you got the person doing the kata in the field with like the fans, and it's just like this beautiful culture that's just dripping with like rich, vibrant usefulness and beauty. And then you meet Katsumoto, and he's obsessed with cherry blossoms and poetry and having conversations. And when he said, I killed your warrior, and he's like, it was a good death. Or he's like, I killed the, you know, her husband. That was her husband. And he's like, it was a good death. And he's like, what do you mean good death? And then when she's talking to Katsumoto, she's like, I asked permission to take my life. And it's like, what is that? Like, it's so foreign to a Western mind that it's just so captivating and compelling that like you can't watch this movie and not at least be interested, if not completely entertained. Anyway, I could talk about this movie all night. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Definitely perfect in my mind.
You're not allowed to say it's a perfect movie yet. That's not the end. That's at the end.
Spoiler. Sorry, I can't.
Spoiler alert.
That's what I was gonna say. Is just to wrap it all up. This time watching it, it was his relationship with the little boy that stuck out to me, because again, in that same vein of like two starkly different cultures trying to understand each other. Remember when he's with the mom and the kid starts to cry and like storms out, and he's like, it's because I killed his father. And she's like, no, it's because he cares about you and he doesn't want you to die like his father. And you see on Tom Cruise's face that it hits him, that he's like, I've misunderstood this whole relationship. And so then he walks out and sits next to the boy and has that moment with them where he talks about fear and how it's okay to be afraid. And even like an adult warrior that's seen many battles, you can still be scared. And then like the little boy leans into him and hugs him. Like, I'm getting chills just talking about it. It's such a beautiful scene. And it's like on the eve of the war, you know, and it's like drizzly gray outside, and they're just sitting on this porch, and there's kind of this lull right before the war is about to happen. And they have this moment, and this last time watching it, especially, just like I almost welled up with tears. I'm like, this is so beautiful that this boy can connect with his father's killer after an entire movie of character development where they start to understand each other and that like their worlds start to merge. And all of a sudden there's no animosity, there's no bitterness, there's no cold shoulder, there's no even sadness for the act that Nathan thinks would cause sadness. Rather, it's now he's found his place in this tribe, in this culture, in this family. And the boy is now scared that he's going to lose Nathan too. Just beautiful. I mean, it's just poetic. It's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous movie, a gorgeous story, gorgeous characters. I love it all. Okay, so now, Alan, I'm going to pass the buck back to you. Did any of us mention, I don't even think any of us mentioned anything wrong with the movie. So what was the thing that you were thinking might be, and just, okay, if I'm going to throw something out there, like in the negative, I would say, we talked about accents are a problem. The historical accuracy might be a problem. Other than that, though, I mean, what else? Unless you get really nitpicky and be like, oh, he kicked a guy and the kick wasn't hard enough for the guy to fly back as far as he did. That's
there was one thing I remember when it came out, which
okay.
I think holds weight.
So sorry, Alan. Just one more thing, and that is the sword. I actually like how Nathan, like at first, he's holding the wooden sword like he would a rapier, like a Civil War sword, you know, and you see his form morph over time as he trains with the samurai. He goes from the one-armed like sideways stance to the two-hand forward stance of kendo. Like it's really cool to watch like the evolution of his training. And then Justin, I will correct you when you said they didn't fight with two swords. Have you read the Book of Five Rings? He actually says that that's how he wins his battles, is he uses two swords, one for each hand. Don't do one hand with, or one sword with two hands. He's like, if you have two hands, you should have two swords. It gives you two blades, double the advantage. So actually, in traditional samurai training, some of them did.
But not in 1870 is what my point is.
When was Matsumoto?
1870, they were actually, the samurai were actually using rifles. So this is a romantic movie, and so they're trying to do that. I got this from a Japanese historian on YouTube, so take that what you will.
Oh, he was lying to you. Listen, the guns he was talking about were the Japanese that Nathan Algren were training. Okay, not the villages in the mountains, sir. They were traditional.
No, because he was like, Quasimodo, or his character, his real life persona in the real world, he's like, he's not that stupid. He would use every advantage he could, and he was using rifles. So that was his historical point.
Well, that just is a wet blanket to this whole movie. So yeah, we'll pass it back to you. What are your thoughts?
Thumbs down now.
And what was the one thing that you thought was sort of flaw-ish?
So I have, I took a couple notes while you guys were talking. I noticed I was going to say the same thing about the samurai using two blades. I will concede that, yes, historically speaking, towards the end of the feudal era, yes, the samurai did use guns as well. The point of the movie is not to be historically accurate. So take that. Bushido.
Oh, really? So it was kind of like fantasy and like kind of like allegory.
No, it was making the distinction in the historical inaccuracies was integral to the story in order to show the difference between the traditional Japanese and the samurai as they made their acceptance into the modern industrial era. That is part of the storytelling narrative, so it's different than First Night. Just saying. So you can take your wet blanket and wrap yourself in it. I wrote down, so a couple of things. Bushido is it's their code of ethics, and it's never been written. Well, it wasn't written down for centuries. So to be true to it is more of a feeling than it is a letter to the law. And so, as Justin was saying, that this movie perfectly encapsulates that, I would totally agree, because there's not like a definitive thou shalt and thou shalt nots with Bushido. Bushido. Why am I not saying that right? Bushido. And as Chase was talking, it reminded me that that this movie definitely checks the girlfriend factor. it was kind of funny when I watched this. I watched it again with Becky, and it's kind of like just after a long day, and Becky's like, I want to watch something. I want to watch something good. Pick something good to watch. And I said, well, I have a homework assignment. Do you want to watch The Last Samurai? And she's like, yes, let's watch The Last Samurai. So it checks that box as well. I'm just saying, the journaling piece, I totally agree with. I think that is a very, very good point, and it hits the same reminder strings for me watching this movie too. And then I don't know if anybody else caught this, just a little bit of a fun fact. Nathan Algren's boss at the beginning of the movie, the guy that he's working for, who calls him out and fires him, is Dickless. You get that reference? Anybody else get that reference? Yes, sir. That man is Dickless. Requote. Think about it for a minute. Okay. One of the other things that I forget who was talking, but it just reminded me, the character of Bob in this movie I thought was so good, and it just follows right along the lines of just really good character development. And there's one line in the movie that just makes me laugh so much, and it's when he's walking around just kind of thinking about, or just trying to figure out like what he's supposed to do with himself now that he's a prisoner, but not really a prisoner, right? Like he's just trying to figure it out. And then he says at one point, and he's like, mind if he gets to that point, he's like, I'm going to call you Bob. You mind if I call you Bob? And he's like, I know why you're upset. It's because they always make you wear a dress. And then later in the movie, he puts it on for the first time, and he's doing like his makeshift like martial arts kicking and stuff. Like he's just trying it out. And then the little kid walks in and catches him, and he like kind of has that awkward moment. I just love that. It's just one of the things that you reminded me of. And then Bo, you're definitely getting soft. Having a kid has made you a softie, because I think it shows in your most recent viewing, and that's kind of okay. The big thing, my biggest problem with this movie, and I think it might be a plot hole error, and it's the ninja scene. It's when the Omara, is that his name? The villain, the antagonist, when he sends ninjas to take out Katsumoto in his home village. Why wouldn't he just send somebody with guns? Like that was like the whole point, was that he was leaning towards this modernization of the Japanese military and the Japanese army. And then, except I'm going to use ninjas to go, fight swords with swords against these, villagers up in the mountain. It was kind of just one of those where it was like, would that have happened? Would have happened? There would probably, if I was a tactical dude that's like making this huge push, why would I send ninjas when I could send somebody with guns and then just end it right then and there? So that was kind of like my biggest hang up on this recent viewing. Bo, go ahead.
Yeah, wasn't there a line that justified it where Nathan Algren asked Katsumoto, was that Umara? And he said yes. And then he said, if the emperor wanted me dead, all he has to do is ask. Like they had that dialogue. Remember that? I think that and without spelling it out, the way that I justify it in my mind is Omara, if that was the guy's name, I don't remember what his name is either. The bad Japanese dude. He wanted plausible deniability. If he sent a soldier with a gun, well, all of a sudden that's directly disobeying the orders of the emperor, who wanted peace with Katsumoto. So what he did was he hired like a contracted assassin, a ninja group that's disassociated with the military, so that he'd have plausible deniability. So they could kill Katsumoto. He wouldn't have to do it. His hands would be clean. He could look at the emperor and say, oh, Katsumoto died, and it was this rogue, a rogue group of bandits that did it. I had nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, he's paying them under the table. That's the sense that I got, is so that he could have that like plausible deniability, washing his hands clean, and be like, I had nothing to do with it. But Katsumoto was wise to it, and he said, yeah, of course he sent them, even though it wasn't necessarily spelled out. What do you think about that justification?
I'll buy it for sure. Again, this was me trying to be a little bit nitpicky as I'm watching this movie. I'm trying to find the flaws in it, and that's a very acceptable plausible deniability. I like that.
And it just made for an awesome action scene.
It was a killer action scene, like super awesome action scene. Yeah,
Dude,
it was.
the build up to it when when Nathan like first sees something on the roof and he like squints and he's like, "Did I see that?" And you as an audience member like, "Did he see that?" And then all of a sudden the Kabuki actor or whatever gets shot with a dart in the face and you're just like, "Oh!" And then action ensues. It's freaking awesome. And you get to see Nathan's like new samurai skills put to the test immediately. Like, it's so sick. I love that scene.
It is a super sick scene.
I
It is
think
wicked awesome. Like the tension is real. Like the kids are there, Taka's there. Like he's like, it's not just keeping Katsumoto safe. He's like, no, like these are my hosts. Like I've come to grow and appreciate these people, regardless if I killed their dad. Like I feel like the sense of ownership to him. And there's like that panic, like multiple times. Like the first time watching this movie, like I still remember that scene because it is super intense. Like even more intense, I would say, than the climax of the movie. Like it's really good. I was just trying to be nitpicky and trying to find flaws with this movie, and that's it. And that's really like no like real plot holes. Let me pull up my list again. I think, I definitely watch this movie if it comes on. It's one that I can watch over and over again. It is long, but intentionally so. But I always know that it's worth the investment. It's worth the time to sit down and watch this movie, 100%. The skills, the acting, even though it is not super historically accurate, the trivia of that history makes it interesting. This is a movie that makes you want to know more about history. And so even though it's not exactly historically accurate, I think the fact that you're digging into it is telling about how good of a story this movie actually makes it. Again, the music I think really made this movie in a lot of ways. It still hits me every time. It's part of my regular listening my regular playlists. I think this movie stands the test of time. It definitely gets better with age, and yeah. All right. So I think Chase had another thing, but at this point, I'll say that this is my nomination. I think that this is a perfect movie. I almost feel a little bit guilty because I wasn't like trying to stretch and find something that might be on the cusp or might be really debatable or even something that you guys hadn't seen before. I know we've all seen this movie. This isn't a first viewing for any of us, but I really wanted to talk about it. And the reason is because, as I said at the beginning, every time a new movie's come out, I'm like, man, that was a killer good movie. And then anybody asks me, is like, well, where'd you rank it? And I was like, so you know what? I still put this movie in my, like, at least in my top 3. Like, this movie is one of my all-time favorite movies. And it consistently has not been beaten out by new movies since then. So I love this movie. I really wanted to talk about it. My nomination, I vote that this is a perfect movie.
Cool.
All right, Chase.
So, yeah, I'll throw in my last thought and then I'll give my vote as well. I additionally vote that it is a perfect movie.
Justin, final analysis and vote.
I've said it before. The inaccuracies just it's got to be out of it has to be because First Night was out of it. It's the same reasons to keep that one out, right? I'm going to hound that one forever, especially when you come up with the same movie tropes and then say, no, this one's a perfect movie, but even it didn't have it all that anyway. Yes, it is. You know it is. I know it is. And I would say this, as far as the ratings go, I've seen worse things on TV shows like Walking Dead and like 24 than this movie as far as graphic. You guys were talking about how maybe in 2003 it was, but not recently. We've definitely been desensitized. Like this is a TV 14 movie. It comes maybe take out one scene or two with like excessive like blood, but for the most part, Wolfenstein was more graphic than this. So I thought it was very tactfully done as far as if you were to tell somebody, on the street, your buddy, like, hey, watch out for, there's no scenes I would say, hey, watch out for this in this movie. Like, it's all good. It's nothing. Even the relationship with Taka was very tastefully done. It wasn't just like, hey, let's just have them kiss and stuff. You know, it was one little peck, and then at the end, it was alluded that he went back and, you know, was the father figure for the family, but it wasn't. It was all believable and it was all tactful. So there you go. You get 2 thumbs up.
All right, I'm assuming 2 thumbs up is perfect. So that's great. Well, let's see if I agree. Let's see. Justin, you actually reminded me of something that I was really impressed with the movie as well, because especially as a teenager, I was very cognizant of, like, you know, if we bring this movie back from Blockbuster, are we going to have to fast forward scenes because I'm watching it with my parents? I love that this movie had at least two prime opportunities to include a graphic sex scene when she was showering in the waterfall, and then she covers up. And when there were 3 scenes actually, when he sees her and she's like and she looks up at him and then closes the door. And then the 3rd scene is when she's dressing him. And again, all they do is peck. I love how tasteful this movie took that relationship. It was just so beautiful and tasteful. And like, there was love and there was tension and there was even, dare I say, sexual tension in the air and between their mannerisms. And when he's like taking the log from her, she's like, men don't carry logs. And he's like, I'm not a Japanese man. Remember, like, those scenes, they were like conduits to a sex scene. And I kept waiting for it. The first time I was watching the movie, I'm like, here it comes. This is an R-rated movie. You know, this one didn't. Why? I don't know why, but I thought that it was so tastefully done. And I'll just say, as my final point, the character development of Nathan Algren, of being a drunk. I love when he's yelling for sake and he's just screaming into the night and nobody listens to it. Like, that's how you get rid of addiction. Like, take notes, 2024. And I know that some people die of alcohol poison, whatever, but I just love the idea of neglect, of that discipline that Nathan eventually grew to love and appreciate and leverage in order for, like, to advance himself. That was the first catalyst, was the discipline to be screaming for sake all night and not get it. And he had to just deal with it. I love that. And then I love how once he broke free of alcoholism, he says no when offered alcohol once he's back, you know, to civilization. And then he goes back and says, I need to get a drink. And so it's like this, he's teetering and you're like, no, don't go back to the drink. And then, you know, he has that assassination attempt. Anyway, the final thing I'll say, that was all leading up to his character development, that I think that the scene of her dressing him in the traditional, like, warrior garment, it not objectively, because everybody has their different opinions and art is weird and people like different movies and different scenes. Subjectively, that is one of the most beautiful scenes in a movie I think that I've ever witnessed. I wish that scene was 15 minutes longer. It was just, it's just like the music, and it's almost like they were engaged in some sort of like unspoken dance with each other, where he's like standing and just the way that he moves and the way that he's like watching her and the way that she folds in the cloth. And it's just like this high quality, like really thick kimono. Yeah, exactly. Justin, he just typed poetry in film. That's the perfect description of that scene, in my opinion. So anyway, yes, I vote it's a perfect movie. So, and Brownie just told me he was here. He had to drive home. That's why he's not here on this recording. He told me to let everybody know he votes perfect as well. So that's 5 votes for perfection. We'll get the rest of the votes from the gentleman via Marco Polo. And then to wrap this up, Chase, it's your turn, right, to nominate the next perfect movie. Oh, Alan, is there anything else, or are we good to move on? Perfect. All right, Chase, go ahead and take it away. Tell us, reveal the movie and any nudges or hints or words of advice going into this movie.
All right. Yeah, so I have a list of 4 movies that I've been considering since we set on this journey. And I'm going with the one that I think is going to cause the most discussion. I feel it's a perfect movie, but I also haven't seen this movie in over 5 years. So I'm going off of memory of how good it was. and hopefully, we can dissect it and come out of the other side with this movie is perfect. It's an adventure movie. It's about adventure. And the movie is Peanut Butter Falcon. And so I don't know. I know Bo has seen it. I believe Drew has seen it. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. But this movie, it plays back in my mind and in my life so frequently. And there's so many great moments in it. So what I'll tell you is it's an adventure movie. And it has a kid with Down syndrome in it. And he really is Down syndrome. And just like, if you know a lot of the backstory around the movie, it makes it more endearing. But you don't need to know that to appreciate the movie. Just know that they got an actual Down syndrome kid to play the co-lead in this movie. So you give it a little bit of grace there. But I think besides that, I'm excited for us to dig in and review this movie.
Sweet. Cool. Well, that'll be the movie for next time. Peanut Butter Falcon. You heard it from Chase himself. So with that, we will wrap up. We have another perfect movie in the books, The Last Samurai. Thank you for nominating that one, Alan. Super fun discussion. And I look forward to syncing up with you guys next time to discuss Peanut Butter Falcon and the perfection or non-perfection therein.
I'm bringing the jelly.
You're bringing the jelly. I'm bringing the pigeon. Okay, let's wrap this up.
All
Have a
right.
good night, guys.
Bye.